Located on a wooded promontory overlooking the Delaware River, Andalusia has been a stately presence on this stretch of water just north of Philadelphia for more than 200 years. Even the earliest visitors to Andalusia remarked upon it, the pervasive sense one has here of having left the world and its cares behind. This feeling is intensified in the property's lush gardens, newly reconceived by the famous British landscape designer Lady Arabella Lennox Boyd. As one wanders through these fragrant spaces, intoxicated by their beauty, the sense of peace and wonderment only grows.
It's amazing that Andalusia has survived. It's one of those very fragile, very beautiful things that never should have been here today.
With its soaring white columns, the Big House at Andalusia is considered one of the finest examples of Greek Revival architecture in the country and is one of the most recognizable buildings in America.
In the pantheon of American architecture, Andalusia holds a very firm place as one of the brightest shining stars.
In 1814, Andalusia passed from John Craig to his daughter Jane and her husband Nicholas Biddle, a prominent banker and cultural leader in the early Republic. To this day, Andalusia reflects the wide-ranging interests of Nicholas Biddle, a Renaissance man who was an art critic and patron, poet, editor, and innovative farmer. An ardent proponent of classical architecture, Nicholas Biddle commissioned the famous Philadelphia architect Thomas Eustace Walter to design a Greek temple facade to wrap around the existing Craig House, originally expanded in 1806 by Benjamin Latrobe, the second architect of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The Big House was placed on the National Register of Historic Landmarks in 1966. Its contents include paintings by Thomas Sully and Bass Otis, early 19th century furniture from Philadelphia and Baltimore, and swords, uniforms, and memorabilia belonging to Commodore James Biddle, Nicholas's brother, and an early American naval hero, who served as the first commandant of the United States Naval Academy. The extensive library at Andalusia contains more than 3,000 rare volumes, some dating back to the 17th century, all preserved in their original environment.
There are letters of Commodore Biddle explaining his career in the Navy for 48 years. There are letters from Thomas Jefferson to Nicholas Biddle about the Lewis and Clark expedition. There's a letter from George Washington, James Monroe, and more recent letters from people who were in World War I and corresponded with Charles Biddle. It runs the gamut of American history. It's like going back in time and being part of this family and this time in American history that is so important to our country.
When you look around, there's not a lot that is saved in this country anymore historically. So for this to be a place that people can find, they come here and they're so excited to see this beautiful home that is opened up, which is a home, not a museum. Because they actually feel that when they came through, that the family was just kind enough to leave for that hour to let them have a peek into this glorious home.
Andalusia's gardens date back for centuries. Though rooted in the English landscape tradition, Andalusia is not meant to be a historic landscape. Its gardens and grounds have continuously evolved since the late 1700s, when the first garden was created by the original owner, John Craig. Other Andalusia residents followed Craig, contributing to what has become a collective garden, evolving over 200 years. Some added small touches here and there, while others made extensive changes. The result is a kind of horticultural timeline, one that reflects the long continuum over generations of one family and America itself.
Andalusia is like this little time capsule. You're stepping back in time to a different era, but it's not set in time. It's also a living, breathing garden. It has that real sense of place that allows you to walk in and feel transported. And I love that.
A major step in the garden's evolution was overseen by Letitia Glenn Biddle, who moved to Andalusia in 1888 after marrying Charles Biddle, noting in her journal that vegetables rather than flowers were mainly cultivated in Andalusia's gardens. She set out to redress the balance, adding colorful blooms and more formal gardens.
Letitia Glenn Biddle is one of my heroines, my gardening heroines, and I actually lecture about her in my Women in Horticulture lecture. She's that important.
Letitia's horticultural expertise didn't just serve Andalusia, but the nation as well. In 1904, she hosted the very first meeting of the Garden Club of Philadelphia at Andalusia. 9 years later, she and several other women, working in the property's billiard room, drafted the Constitution that established the Garden Club of America. The most recent transformation of Andalusia's gardens took place in 2017, when noted British landscape designer, Lady Arabella Lennox Boyd, stepped in to update them, adding over 15,000 plants to the gardens. It was a natural pairing. Her deep knowledge of Britain's stately homes made her ideally suited for creating an appropriate natural context for Andalusia in keeping with its 19th century English landscape tradition. In 2020, Andalusia was awarded Level 2 accreditation as an arboretum and is now recognized in the Morton Register of Arboreta, a database of the world's tree-focused public gardens.
There's great diversity, but what really stands out are the many mature specimens that are growing here, and the way they're situated, mostly far apart, standing on their own, without obstructing the wonderful views and vistas to the Delaware River. Also, there are many young specimens that have been added in recent years that help enrich the diversity of the collection, at the same time help ensure the future of the tree collection.
40 years ago, the Biddle family made the decision to divide Andalusia in half and give away the big house and nearly 50 acres of land to the Andalusia Foundation. The time had come, they felt, to share Andalusia's beauty with others who would understand and appreciate it, just as the Biddle family has done for generations. Andalusia survives today because so many people have given their time and resources to caring for this extraordinary place.
If Andalusia were no longer around or available for people to visit, we'd be turning away school groups, scholars, graduate students, the general public, people who love gardens and architecture, and just people who want to see a beautiful place, not even thinking about those people who are influenced by what this place holds for American history.
Andalusia is now a museum, public garden, and arboretum, open to visitors from around the world for the past 40 years. The Andalusia Foundation is dedicated to preserving the big house, its archives, formal gardens, and living collection of over 800 trees to ensure that this jewel of American history survives to delight and inform visitors for years to come.